Okay, we're going to discuss DropSync for commence. DropSync is a program that's used to offload the syncing operations that commence normally performs in a workgroup environment so that commence can perform faster and commence can respond better to perhaps hostile environments, things like that. Let's go through that real quick. DropSync provides sync control. You can turn syncing on and off dynamically as you see fit. DropSync decreases sync processing time. It does this by allowing the clients and the servers to sync with local hard drives, therefore increasing the speed at which it's capable of syncing, because part of the sync operation is to transfer the sync files from the Commence database into the sync folders. Since Commence doesn't have to do this itself, the DropSync program does it for it. The sync time that Commence spends syncing is greatly reduced. It has smart sync rates. This means that it is capable of detecting when Commence is the active application, when it's the inactive application, and when it's inactive, sync rates are increased. When Commence becomes active because the user wants to look up in something or work with the database, it can automatically slow the sync task down. It is also fault tolerant. Commence has a notorious habit of disconnecting itself from the workgroup when it loses access to its sync folders. So by shifting that task off over to DropSync, DropSync will detect when the folders come and go, but Commence has no knowledge of the loss of the network shared folders, so therefore it never disconnects its sync and never stops syncing. Working on some new future features. Those are smart sync alerts. This means it will notify the user or a system administrator that there's a sync problem. And software controllable, we want Commence to be able to turn it on and off with a script, perhaps. Let's take a look at how this works. In a normal, typical workgroup configuration, the client and server share a common LAN folder. This means the server will deposit down files into the LAN folder and the client will pick those up, and then a client will deposit up files into that shared LAN folder and the server will pick those up, and they handshake back and forth. There's also a couple of other administration files that appear in there that DropSync is aware of and takes care of also. Typical workgroup environment is when you have everybody in the same office, all connected to the same LAN, all sharing the same shared LAN folder, and your server is the same space as well. This thing is fine for these kinds of environments, but as soon as you add a remote client who is perhaps connecting to your shared LAN via VPN, then you start to experience some difficulty because VPNs are notorious for being slow. They're also somewhat intermittent. You have connections that are going over the internet. Sometimes the internets are not available. Therefore, the shared LAN folders are not available. Therefore, the remote client becomes disconnected from the workgroup and syncing stops and will not resume until the user intervenes. That becomes a problem. And it even gets exacerbated when you add a VPN service to the server side of the equation, which we've had to do. That seriously slows down sync operations between the server and that shared LAN, which is now remote. You have all the same connectivity issues. It starts to become a real problem out here. Commence gets very unfriendly when you start remoting its sync folders. The alternative to syncing with direct Commence is to use DropSync. What DropSync does is it sits between a local hard drive that's on the database side and the remote shared LAN. That remote shared LAN can be direct within the network, or it can be over a VPN. It doesn't matter. DropSync is simply moving files back and forth between a local disk and a shared LAN folder. All of these files here occur on the same computer. So you have DropSync running on the same computer as the Commence server or the Commence client itself. The server drops down files into a local disk, which it can do very quickly. That speeds up the sync processing time. DropSync detects those and moves those down files out to a shared folder. Again, the clients drop up files into a shared LAN folder. DropSync recognizes that and moves those to the local disk, and that's how syncing is performed. The same thing with a remote client. If you want to add a remote client to your network, you can install DropSync over on that remote client. The remote client will now sync with a local drive. DropSync detects the activity in that local disk and moves it up to the shared LAN folder. Again, this DropSync pulls it over here and moves it off to the server. And then in reverse, the server drops down files to a local disk. DropSync moves them to a shared LAN folder. The remote DropSync detects those down files, moves those to the local disk, and the remote client picks that up. So what ends up happening is DropSync is really sitting in between your database and some common share. Let's take a look at the user interface and see what that looks like. This is the monitoring screen of DropSync. What this has is up at the top an up file source. This tells you where your up files are and what's presently in that folder. And that's just it's kind of a monitoring folder. This tells you the date of the file, the user, what's just the file name rather, and then the size of the file. The down source is the same sort of configuration. It's the date, the file name, and size. What you're really looking for here is does the up file folder contain the same files as the down folder? What DropSync is trying to do is it's trying to get these two folders to look the same. And down here in the bottom of the half of the window is the monitoring section that tells you what files are bouncing back and forth. So what you can see now is that the server has placed a down file on its folder, and DropSync has recognized that. It moved it over to the upside here for a second. You just missed it. And then the client application picked that up and took it away. Now there's two up files sitting here, and so you just kind of watch these two files bounce back and forth. Let's take a look at the configuration screens. There is a sync now button. It tells you that it's going to sync in 6 seconds, 5 seconds, so forth. There is a sync now button. You can press that and it will immediately cause it to sync, and you can also press the stop sync button and that will stop the synchronization operation. So that tells you here that it's stopped at this time, and then you can resume it. Now when you're doing this with DropSync, it has no impact on the commence database. The commence database does not know what's happening back here. In the config screens, you can give the database name that you're running. That's important because DropSync needs to be able to detect when commence is active, so it does it by reading the title that's in the screen. You tell it where the path is to the database. It's an important piece of information. It'll put a period in there and it will pick up the path that was used to run DropSync. The up source folder, here's where we're running a client, and the source folder that the client is dropping its files into is some folder that's on the local hard drive. This is where the up files go from the client. Here's the down source folder. Here's our remotely located folder. The client sync ID list, you can put multiple IDs in here. Here we're on a client, so we only have one ID that we need to put in there. I'm working on a translation program for this that will translate those IDs into usernames so they're a little bit easier to understand. And you have a no sync list. Those are clients that you want to leave off the sync list. I'll talk about that later. Here's the active sync interval. This tells you I want to sync at this sync rate whenever commence goes active, and this is the inactive sync rate. Whenever commence is not the active application, it'll use this sync rate. So right now you'll see the syncing is starting up here in just a few seconds. It runs about every 15 seconds between sync operations. Now as soon as I commence the active application, you can see now the sync rate just got bumped up to 300 seconds, and that's because commence is now active. So what's going to happen is I'm now able to interact with this application without interfering, without being disrupted by any synchronizing tasks. This is very handy when you have a very busy work group and you want to keep it up to date. There's another feature in here called immediate sync on inactive, and what you can see here is normally my sync rate when I'm active in the application is every 300 seconds. Well, when I'm on the application, boom, there it just went up to 300 seconds. As soon as I leave the application, I'm no longer busy with it, so I might want to get an immediate update. So as soon as I deselect commence, it immediately starts syncing, so that when I come back to commence, commence is likely to be up to date for me already. So that's just kind of a handy feature. I want to immediately sync. Display log lines is just this monitor screen over here. It will keep track of what happened up to however many lines you specify. I think I limit that thing to 9,000 lines or something. That's basically the application. You can notice that in your customized work group, Your shared LAN folder is just simply a local hard drive, and your sync rate is set extremely high every 15 seconds. And that means that you want commence to pick up those sync files just as quickly as they arrive, but you're using DropSync to control all of your intervals and all of your activity. Now I'm going to do something here. I'm going to take the application, I'm going to unplug my network cable from this computer, and now it's removed. And what's going to happen here is DropSync is going to detect that the shared LAN folder is going to disappear. I don't know if I can continue recording video during this time, but let's give it a try. Now here you can see what's happened is the DropSync program is now in sort of a suspended operation. It's still acting like it's syncing, but what it's indicating is our down source folder is unavailable. What that means is it has detected the loss of the network, and it recognizes that the folders that it uses for transferring the file throughs are missing, so therefore it's going to suspend the sync operations. However, it's going to continue to perform its scanning operations. As far as our commence application is concerned, it's still active, it's still running, it still thinks all is good. It has no knowledge of having the network gone away. So what's going to happen is, as soon as the network connection is reestablished, which I can try to do, it probably will take longer than I'm interested in taking on this video, since I am on a VPN. Oh, there it goes. It was pretty quick. Picked it up right away. It picks up that the network folders were replaced, and therefore that syncing just automatically resumes. Here's an up file. It's fixing to upload, and it'll upload that to the server, and then of course it'll pull down this download file. Now the up file here will remain on the local hard drive until the server picks up the up file and deletes it and all of that, and then it'll finally follow through with deleting it on the local hard drive. So anyway, it's just a complete mirroring task of the commence sync operations. That's all I have for now. Appreciate your comments.